Hi, everybody. Welcome to High School Football Rewind. A little different look today. Myself, Sam Bourquin here. TJ Downing to the left. Far right is Drew Sarachman. And here we got Coach Thom McDaniels going to be joining us. We are live at Jerzees today, the cafe down at the Centennial Plaza in downtown Canton, the site of our big party on Saturday, the pregame watch party. McKinley, Massillon, meeting 1:33. Come on down Saturday. The fun begins at 10. The kickoff at 2:07. We'll have a live game right up on the big screen. We got some coaches' interviews, a lot of stuff going on. We'll get into that as we move forward. But primarily today, guys, we want to we're going to change things up a little bit today, and we're going to go heavy with Week 10, the War of 1894, the McKinley-Massillon rivalry, and we're so happy to have Coach McDaniels. Coach, it's good to see you again. I can remember we've had a lot of interviews over the years. It's been a while, but, man, nobody better to get, I think, the Canton-McKinley perspective than yourself, and we appreciate you coming over.
Well, I was part of it for 20 years. 18 of those as a coach, and then the 2 years at the end of my time in Canton as the AD. Mm-hmm. But the 18 years, 2 as an assistant and 16 as a head coach, left a mark on me that it'll never go away. So I'm anxious and eager and happy to talk with you.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff. I know I got some great questions now, TJ and Drew. And TJ, let you get the ball rolling here as we talk Bulldogs and Tigers here. And oh, by the way, it's going to be 70 and sunny on Saturday.
Can you imagine
that's really
that
awesome.
with what we're looking at right now?
Yeah, today is.
Looking out here, it's wet. Yeah. It's been cold, and a lot of people would say that's football weather. I am a fair weather fan. I loved playing 70, 75 degrees because you didn't have to loosen up again. After halftime, you come out and it's cold, and it's like, oh, man, I'm already tightened up from that 20 minutes. We should have just kept playing. But, it's nice that we're going to have great weather. It's nice that McKinley has kind of found their way here through this season. Mm-hmm. You've been through enough football in your days to know that you can have the roller coaster. It's not always going to be sunshine and roses. You're going to have what's the old word that we always face at some time or another in football? Handling adversity. Mm-hmm. Coach Antonio Hall's done a pretty good job of that. I mean, they came out, they weren't ready at the time. And I think the great thing was his guys have responded well to him. And look where they're sitting at now. I think they have played as good a football over the last 3-4 weeks as anybody around.
I'm hard pressed to recall somebody losing their first 4 and then winning their next 5. And I'm sure that somebody in the county has done that. Somebody in the state has done that. But nobody comes to mind. So what they have accomplished today is remarkable in and of itself. We're dealing with younger people and the emotions and the things that they hear, in the community and from the community, after losses. The praise is inflated also when you win. So that's a huge part of a high school head football coach's job. That's a huge piece to have to manage, and what he's done up to this particular point is short of remarkable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you coached the big fella, and I always told you, I don't know if you remember my speech from the Stark County High School Football Hall of Fame induction, but I mentioned as I sat down there and I saw guys like Antonio Hall, and I'm standing up there alongside Phil Martin and thinking about a guy like John Grimsley and then seeing Jamar Martin down there, and I thought, this is a perfect time for me to be able to tell you and your players that, when I was in high school at Glen Oak, we wanted to be you guys. We saw the roadmap of success that you guys laid out in the mid-'90s and to do what you did in 97. And, we wanted to be you guys, and we envied and idolized what you guys did. And then on top of that, for me, as a young lineman, to see Antonio Hall be Stark County MVP, I mean, that's cool. That's, us linemen, we don't get a whole lot of glory. We're not in the limelight like some of the other players are. But to know that, it's out there for the taking. Antonio was just a special breed as a player, right? Yeah,
he was. He started on that 97 team as a sophomore at guard, and playing as a sophomore period it was difficult and not a frequent thing, though the 2 classes ahead of him, Jamar and DeMarlo and Rashawn and Kenny's class, they were undefeated as freshmen, and a bunch of those guys started as sophomores. And then the next class, Ben and Mike Doss and Steve Smith, and those kids were undefeated as freshmen and started as sophomores. So, but I'm not naming a lot of linemen at this particular instance. So he was mature beyond his years physically, and he was very bright, caught on, was tough, and earned the right to start as a sophomore, which again had happened, by some kids in the classes ahead of him, but he was probably the only one that I recall from his class that did that. And he was a backup in and out guy as a 3 technique on defense. So, but he had toughness and he had willingness and he had the intelligence and he could take hard coaching. Again, the younger you are, the more difficult it is to take hard coaching. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we believed in that. We believe that we're going to expect the most from our best, and we're going to coach those guys the hardest. And that transition is another thing that we had to help some kids manage because they weren't necessarily used to that at the lower levels. They were patted on the booty and told how wonderful they were, and we're suddenly going to tell them, what you have to do better. But no, he deserved to be a starter on that football team.
And, you talked about the 0-4 start, and then you talk about expectations and standards. And I think part of the reason they've won their last 5 games is because he refused to lower that bar to his team. And he continued to say, these are our expectations. Just because we're struggling, we're not going to lower the bar so you can clear it. And, hats off to him and his staff. And, we were there and interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and I asked him, I said, is there more pressure, because you're at your alma mater? And what he reiterated to us is he said, not from anyone else, it's from myself. And correct. I think that comes from, the things that you guys instilled in those players, in the 90s, those expectations, and they're carrying on now. So it's kind of cool to see that be passed forward in the McKinley football program. Yeah,
your own expectations should far surpass anybody else's. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't always happen, but in this particular instance, I think that you're accurate. I also know that there was a chunk of my career where I cared about the outcome without caring as much, and we hear the word process a lot, but that's not coach speak. That's legit. But there was a time where we transitioned to playing to a standard, and we had them, for every offensive position and for the offense as a group, the defensive players and the defensive group, the special teams, the individual players and the group. And when we transitioned to playing to a standard, that's when we got rich, and that's actually how we got the outcome we were looking for in the first place. And he was part of that. Mm-hmm. We could win and be unhappy, and we were probably way more, than we should have been, and that was my fault. I admit that's one thing I would do differently. I would let people enjoy the victories, maybe more than I did. But we'd win, but we wouldn't measure up to the standard, the expectation, and I tended to make everybody miserable until I learned, we adopted a 24-hour rule where we were going to be happy for 24 hours, and then I was going to make you miserable.
And then watch game tape.
Were you ever happy 24 hours, though?
No. So there was one guy that had to make the adjustment to that, and it was me. Was you. Yeah. And that went with me to Warren, Yep. But yep. It got results, when you take your eye off the outcome and you measure yourself by whether or not we met the standards that we set for ourselves. Mm-hmm. The best example of that comes from the McKinley Massillon game in '97. We win the game. We're 10-0. We retain our spot as the number 1 team in Ohio and that mythical number 1 team in the nation. I get interviewed on the field following the game briefly, and I go into the locker room, and they're not happy. Wow. There's no celebration. We're not blowing the paint off the ceiling with euphoria and joy. They're not happy because they weren't happy with the way they played, and I didn't impose that on them.
That's awesome.
But
isn't that awesome?
That's when I knew we had something.
Yeah, you got something good there.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's great. I really got a chance to experience that when Maurice Claret and I got down there with Coach Tressel in 2002, and we beat Northern Illinois in an opener. It's like, 35-7. It's like, no, you're not happy. We left a lot of meat on the table here. We could have had 2 or 3 more touchdowns. Or what about that possession before halftime? So, to have your standard be that high. But I love what you said about the coaching the players on your team when you have these talented, great recruits, guys that are being looked at all over the country. And Jack Rose was the same way on me. It was like, if I'm harder on TJ and Dustin Fox, which he wasn't on Dustin, but I give that disclaimer. But if I'm harder on TJ than anybody else, everybody else is going to fall in line because everybody knows that TJ's got 30, 35 scholarship offers around the country. And I'm like, I hated it back then, but when I think about it now, I was like, it was really smart by Jack. And that was kind of the same way you did your players. And, I think that's why you went into a locker room and saw that. I mean, that's cool to me to know that, especially for that age group. You can expect that in the NFL or when you're in a high Power 5 conference in college, but for kids that are 16, 17, 18 years old, that's pretty special.
Well, what it meant to me is that they bought into the concept. And it wasn't just my standard or the standards established by the position coaches or the assistant coaches for their particular unit. They bought into that, and I mean, I had an idea that we had something special before that, but that convinced me that this is the way to do it.
Coach Thom McDaniels joining us here at Jerzees Cafe at Centennial Plaza. It is High School Football Rewind here on Stark Media. Coach, a lot of things in life in the world are cyclical, and I would tend to believe that high school football classes are cyclical when they go through the school system. And you guys were blessed with kids that you mentioned played with one another early and stayed with each other. They almost like made a pact. We're going all the way with this, come heck or high water, and we're going to do it. We're going to finish our goal. What was it like for you to coach such a talented class, but such good kids? Also, family very heavily involved with Benny and Josh, and obviously, the whole McDaniels family. But what was that like, and how did you embrace that, especially for that 2-year period of, wow, we could really do something really neat right here, right now?
Well, we had an inclination that we had, the one special class as freshmen, and I think that one of the good decisions that I made was that I didn't elevate any of them to the varsity. I was not going to fracture that class by elevating this guy and leaving this guy on the freshman team. And so they played through their schedule, were undefeated, and were playing everybody that we were playing on the freshman level. And when their season ended, and that always ended, Massillon week, then we elevated some of those guys, the guys who, one, they were good kids in the building, 2, they had good grades. We weren't worried about eligibility. And 3, they gave us an indication that they were good enough to be elevated, and they served as practice players. Well, then we get the next class, and we sort of had the inclination about them too, that this is a good class, and they got a lot of the right pieces, not identical to the class ahead of them, but they had a lot of right pieces, and we did the same thing. We're not going to elevate any of these guys, and there was clamor for it both years.
Oh, I bet.
Okay, but we didn't do that, and so they stayed intact. We weren't going to fracture that class either. They went undefeated, and when their last game was played, we elevated a handful of them, and the benefit of deep runs in the playoffs is more practice.
More practice,
Absolutely.
more camaraderie,
we
more
had
everything.
14 or 15-week
firsthand.
seasons instead of 10-game seasons. I mean, Chuck Kyle, that's the lasting lesson over the dynasty that those guys had is that they got coached for more weeks out of the year than other kids got coached, and they got to compete for more weeks. So we were a benefit of that. But I think keeping those two groups intact, through their freshman seasons, I think that was a good thing. And they developed, their own identity as a class, and they had success together. But I think that was in part an answer to your question.
Yeah, and I've I wasn't aware of that, and I think that's a great story because nowadays it's, hey, let's get this kid up quick and let's get him experience and let's plug holes now and we'll worry about the future later. But that's I had no idea that was, and that's obviously turned out to be a genius move.
Yeah. So, when you talk about rivalry games, obviously no bigger rivalry in high school football than Massillon McKinley, but it's been my experience in coaching. In these rivalry games, it's not always the superstars. It's not always the Michael Doss. It's not always the Justin Zwick. It's the seniors that have been in the program for so many years that end up making big plays in those games that win it for you. Do any of those types of kids come to mind when you look back at over the Massillon McKinley rivalry over the years of some of those kids that, hey, he was a huge reason we won the game. He made these plays, not necessarily some of the superstars that get all the newspaper.
Well, I think it was true before the McKinley Massillon game. There were guys that were really good players for us. But they didn't play skilled positions. They may not have been household names. They may not have been great players in youth football, or maybe even not great players in the middle school level. But they became really good players, for us in other roles. One of the things that I have long believed and just had a conversation about this. The best player on your team is the guy who is playing best.
Yeah.
And you got to think about that a minute. It isn't necessarily the guy with the most college offers. It's not necessarily the guy that's the most celebrated. It's the best players. The best player is the guy who is playing the best. We had a left tackle who started defensive end. His name was Les Thompson.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Les Thompson. Yep. I can sit here today and make an argument that he was the best player on that team, on a really good football team, because he didn't come off the field, and how well he played as a starting left tackle, and he had double duty. He was a starting defensive end. How he played full-time in those two capacities was arguably better than how anybody else played, and there was a lot of competition for what I just said.
Yeah.
But he's typical of that. Everybody knew that Kenny Peterson played defensive end for the '97 team, and he's got a scholarship offer to go to Ohio State and other places, so on and so forth. Les ends up at Wittenberg and has a great D3 career at Wittenberg. But there are too many. There are too many to recount. I recall that we had a backup safety. He was behind DeMarlo, and a backup wideout behind Matt Curry, James Gamble. He was like the third or fourth. His name was Ricky Fox. Well, he has a touchdown catch against Ignatius in the home game that we had about week 7 or 8 when both teams were undefeated.
The pre-sellout game.
I was
at
sitting
Old
on
Fawcett.
the hill.
Yes.
24,000 people, regular season sold out before the game.
Yes.
How about that?
I was sitting on the hill.
Yep.
But and we had what we called 1.5-way players. DeMarlo never came off the field defensively, but he was in the rotation because we had Jamar, who could take reps at tailback, Michael Doss, Richard Bradley. We rested guys offensively, but didn't rest them very often defensively. Ricky Fox was DeMarlo's backup, and he's the third or fourth receiver, but he has a major catch at a critical point. And it was a long touchdown. It was a 65, probably yard play action pass for a touchdown. But we had bunches of guys like that. Freddie Wilcox, who's famous for the deflection.
The immaculate deflection.
The immaculate deflection at the Rubber Bowl. But he's this little guy that plays the corner opposite James Campbell. But they played great football for us. And there's too many to mention. But yeah, we don't do what we did without tremendous contribution from all of those kinds of guys.
Yeah. And, to kind of follow up that on the individuals of a rivalry, who are some of the guys that when you watched film of the Massillon Tigers, were you staying? Because I've had these moments where I've watched film and I'm just thinking about, like, I'm worried about this guy. Who are some of the guys on the Massillon side that you watch film on and you're like, he's going to be a problem.
Well, again, they're too numerous to mention all of them. Chris Spielman played the game better than any other player that I coached against. And that's – I only say that about one guy. He whatever he was – if he was covering kickoffs, he did it better. And he wasn't the fastest guy, but he was the first guy down to cover kickoff as a sophomore. And what he did offensively and what he did defensively, he was that guy. He was best at everything that he did. He's the best football player and played his positions better than anybody that I ever coached against. I can jump to 1991 and Travis McGuire, and he goes for 300 against us, or 301. I mean, it was, the coaches, we still are close, and we gather once a week, and every once in a while, and now we can laugh about it, but we refer to the 91 game as the Travis McGuire track meet. And we couldn't say that then because it wasn't funny back then. This is old folks looking back, and now we can take a deep breath and man, he was remarkable. He was marvelous. But they've had their share of really good football players who went on to have great college careers just like we did.
Yeah, so many great games, so many players, coaches, assistant coaches. As a young buck from Orville, did you ever imagine being a part of such a tradition-rich rivalry, and not just being a part of it, being a head coach of it, being an assistant coach, watching these kids grow into be adults and husbands and teachers and fathers, and did that ever click early, or was it just like, this is the path life has given me, and let's go?
Well, I came here in 1980 when Terry Forbes got the job, and I thought the Orville-Worcester game was the biggest game in Ohio. Okay, I mean, it was the biggest game that I had experienced in my life, and in a limited capacity. But you bring this up, and if this is not a direct answer to your question, maybe you want to ask it again. But so I come here in 1980, and I had the absolute proper baptism to McKinley Massillon, and I think every guy who's coaching the game for the first time, for the first season of his life, should have the same experience. We beat them week 10 and turn around and lost to them week 11.
Yep.
So that's my introduction to McKinley Massillon. And, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, that was, was that ABC that did that, what the Olympics?
Yeah, the wide world of sport. That was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, and the skier goes tumbling over the edge.
We in 7 days I experienced that. And that really served me well because the 10th game, there's all this hoopla and all of this celebration, the Rotary luncheon, the prayer breakfast. I think we did Kiwanis back then. So both schools had bonfires and pep rallies. The schools decorate. Well, that all happens. The bus ride over to Massillon was breathtaking. We've got police escort on motorcycles, and they know how to do this. And so there's one guy speeding ahead to the next intersection and stopping people, and we approach that intersection, and then a guy from the back would go to the – so there was no pregame speech required because the bus ride was – I remember a policeman, he was kicking the rear quarter panel of a car because the guy was in the way. None of that happens in week 11.
Nope, it's all gone.
That was just
the
week
hoopla's
10.
gone.
Oh my goodness, And the other thing is that and this probably had to do with me not enjoying victories as much as I should, because we probably enjoyed the victory week 10 for longer than we should, and understandably so. How do you duplicate that? And it was. I think I know the first game was on Saturday, but we played the next Friday. If I'm not mistaken. Yep. So in 6 days, we've got to consume this. You got to go back to school on Monday because all the kids want to celebrate the win again, and we're trying to move on. But if anybody new to the game, I would wish that experience for you because you'd understand the whole thing about McKinley Massillon on both ends in the space of 7 days.
That was wild. I remember it like it was yesterday. You win the first game 16-7 at their place. It's game 2, they win 14-6. And I remember I think you guys had a lot of opportunities in that second one. And for whatever reason, in the red zone, things just didn't work out. You had a turnover, what have you.
Yep.
But as you look back at those 2 weeks, those 14 days, have you ever been through a cycle like that since?
Well, no, and I was an assistant coach then. And so whatever cycle we're talking about isn't the same as if I was the head coach. But I just know, and I've had conversations with Ross Rankin, the starting safety on the team, Ricky Worstel, and other kids about what they thought contributed to the demise week 11, following the victory. And they all mentioned that it was just impossible to be as prepared and to be as amped up to play. And, that's another thing, too. I think we got to manage emotion, because you can be too amped up to play well.
Right.
And we never wanted to be that.
Yeah.
And everybody who was part of that can probably give a different answer to it. But that it was tough to manage that winning outcome. And that's the other thing that come of it. We have to manage outcomes, and I'd have this conversation in August. Either way,
absolutely.
In order to win the next week, we got to manage a loss well. In order to win the next week, we got to manage a win well. And so I learned that as an assistant coach, and that was going to be part of who I was if I ever became a head coach.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. So I was earlier today, I was talking to Kent McClelland, who's the president of the Bulldog 100 now, the athletic club there. And, I've known him for a long time. I've known Antonio for a while now. And, he's talking to me about the game and stuff like that. I said, Kent, you don't realize this as an outsider, but it's not just about this game, and it's the aftermath of the game too. So you don't just have, like you're saying, you don't just prepare your team mentally for the game. You have to make sure that this game wasn't everything to them, because you have other goals besides, you talk about those special teams you had. Your only goal wasn't to beat Massillon. It was a big goal, right? But, you've got to be able to prepare these kids mentally to be able to rebound from whatever outcome, you have. And, obviously they don't play again now, but, yeah, you may have to pick it up and play again.
Well, we had good fortune during the 80s and 90s against Massillon. And I can't remember what year it was, but, for the off-season, when the off-season program started a month after our last game, we had a goal chart in the weight room, and again, I can't remember the specific year, but one of the goals was to play well and win week 11. That was a goal, because there were too many instances where we got in. We didn't necessarily lose week 11, but we didn't play great football. And this was before, we set standards and for positions and units and so on and so forth. But that actually became part of the goal board, was to play well and win week 11. There was a little assumption there that we were going to win, but regardless of the outcome, that became a real goal for our program.
Yeah.
I know weeks and at Massillon as well. I know weeks 9 and 11 always have been tricky over the years. This is High School Football Rewind. Sam Bourquin, Drew Sarachman, head coach Thom McDaniels. We are live here at Jerzees Cafe. You can check us out many times here on the Stark Media YouTube channel. Do want to remind you that coming up Thursday night, Central Catholic St. Thomas live on the Stark Media YouTube channel, live audio, live video from Central Catholic at 6:45. So be sure you check this out there. 106.9 Friday, Green and Hoover. 99.7 with TJ and the boys. We'll have Jackson and Hoover. And our Stark Media YouTube game with Drew and Tyler and Jeff will be Tuslaw and Fairless, the battle for the Blue Cup. We also want to shout out our good friends at Jerzees, and, of course, our good friends at Harmon's, T. Roop and the crew, making things happen for us, and as well as Jerzees Cafe and, of course, Departure Realty team and Howard Hanna. Big thank you to all those folks. And I want to kind of stay with the McKinley Massillon theme here, as we do have the big game, the game as we call it. I do want to share a quick 10-second story. You mentioned that back-to-back, you guys win the first, you lose the second one. I was at both games, went with my parents, and that was the first time I got grounded. It was on the way back home from Fawcett. We lived on Lakeside Avenue. It was only about a 4-minute car ride. And I, like you, I grew up at the field house at Fawcett as a kid. And I was elated with the win at Massillon, and I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. They're just going to keep winning, and we're going to have good times, and we're going to go to the 4 wins, and this is going to be awesome. And on the way home from Fawcett, I pulled a Ralphie from the Christmas Story, and I said a bad word, and I didn't see the outside of my room for about a week, so there's that. But anyhow, I've learned and grown from that, I guess, a little bit. What does it mean to you today, this rivalry, as opposed to maybe what it meant the first time you stepped on the field as an assistant coach? You kind of not pull away, because I know you're still heavily invested, but as time goes by, memories, new memories, old memories, relationships, what does that view look like in the mirror as you kind of pull back a little bit?
I'm in an advanced age now, and I wish I could remember all of them, because I'm at that point where it's hard for me to pinpoint the year or pinpoint the player or even remember a guy's name. I may have to, come back to it in 5 minutes or so. But we I think we have a tendency to inflate, the joy or the sorrow that happened, back whenever. And I think people sometimes can do that about anything. But I know this, and this may or not be, an answer to the question, but I know that I'm grateful to have been at McKinley in the 80s and the 90s. That was being at the right place at the right time. The 80 team, I think, was the best McKinley team to not win a state championship. They were good. They were really, really good. We were especially good defensively. And, that team then, evolved into the 81 team that did win the state championship and was the best defensive team I've ever seen in high school.
13 points given up.
Yes.
Crazy.
I mean, it was amazing. And I tend to remember players or plays, some home, some away, some in the McKinley Massillon game, some not. And one of the things that I learned to do, you mentioned week 9 could be a difficult week as week 11 could be.
Yep.
We were better when we were an independent, so we could schedule anybody who was willing to play. We were better when we played somebody formidable week 9 than if we were able to convince a cupcake.
Absolutely.
And I don't mean, I shouldn't use that term. A lesser successful program or a lesser successful opponent to come and play week 9. And I actually, that's one of the things that I attribute to the success that we had against them. That was one of the things that in my mind made us readier to play well week 11, because the quality of your opposition has something to do, a whole lot to do with how good you can become. And we were better off playing somebody really, really good and formidable. The John Sistone teams from St. V, with Mike Vrabel, and no, we were not afraid to schedule formidable people week 9.
I would say that. I think that all changed. I think maybe around 80, because I remember the year you went all the way. You played Toledo Scott. It was 60-0 week 9. And it was brutally cold. Those were 8 o'clock starts back then too, man. It was cold that night. But you're right. If the kids see on the schedule, St. V, Walsh Jesuit, okay, we know we're going to probably look ahead because we're kids, but that other Jersey we're facing coming up, we better be ready to play.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I think is critical when you're part of a game that's as historic and history rich as this one is we didn't look ahead. We didn't talk about week 10 until we got to week 10, And I was a big
huge.
believer, and I'm not a guy that believes in big games. Well, if this was a big game, well, what the heck was last week?
Right.
And what's next week going to be? They were all big. And I lost my train of thought here, but
the whole week, you get the week 9 opponents and the kids haven't been focused, and you guys as well getting ready for that week 10 game. And gosh, imagine, Coach and Drew, imagine then having Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. How more difficult your job would have been to. It's tough enough to block out the noise.
Yep.
Imagine having that 20, 30 years ago.
And I'll tell you what, I know social media, when your time at Jackson, it was just, starting to come out big. But the toughest thing for these coaches now on social media is the team fostering a team element while that's going on in the background.
Yeah.
Because like you said earlier, everything's amplified now by social media, your successes and your failures. And what social media does is it creates an individualized way of thinking. And the team element, the team way of thinking is tough to coach now. So I am jealous that you got to coach in an era with no social media.
Well, I came back out of retirement in 2014. And the McKinley coach left, later in the school year, and they were looking for a head coach at a time that you'd really rather have a guy in place, and so I came out of retirement and I took the job, and I was unprepared for what I encountered, totally, and specifically with regard to social media, and how that impacted trying to coach a group of young people. And I admit to being unprepared, and I admit to doing, that was a terrible job of head coaching on my part, because I was so consumed with managing the locker room that I did a terrible job of coaching coaches, and that's up in the 1 or 2 or 3 most important things you have to do as a head coach is to coach your coaches. And I was so consumed with managing the locker room, because it was a different locker room than anything that I had ever experienced before at Warren Harding or at Jackson or at Canton McKinley, that I neglected the coaches, and the end result was that I did a terrible job, and I didn't have the energy or the stamina to continue to do it. And that's the first time that I realized that I'm getting old.
Well, things change, and they change quickly.
It's not that it was you, because it's tough on younger coaches as well.
Oh.
I mean, it's almost become, and obviously a place at Massillon and McKinley now, they lessen the workload because they realize what an animal controlling a football program is. It's really tough on coaches at some smaller schools that don't have the resources to be able to deal with all that, and I think that's why you're seeing some burnout. There's been a lot of coaches in Stark County and around the area, who stopped coaching in their 30s, who are head coaches and those types of things.
And we're doing well,
yeah,
on the field, but it just eats you up, I guess.
It does. It's not easy nowadays, and the access that the parents have, the social media also echoes their voice as well. And a great example, Spider Miller, who's done an unbelievable job, this past year at East Canton. Rumblings on social media created a storm where the board questioned his ability. And it was unfortunate, and thank goodness they righted the ship there.
I love the response to that.
Yeah.
Because he's still there.
Absolutely.
The good people who knew better didn't just sit back and remain silent. They went to bat for him, they stood for him, and that's the way it should have been.
Yeah. So it is becoming tougher for coaches. I have one last question for you, and this goes back to, we did a Kempthorne Classic. You were I think you took in a couple of the games, the 7-on-7 tournament over at the Fields in the summer. And we had a discussion about the best high school football players we had ever seen. I'm only 35 years old. I had a limited amount, but the too far and away best high school football players I've ever seen, and looking back, I still believe that, are 2 guys you've coached. Mike Doss, because this is the impact he made on both sides of the ball, and Maurice Claret.
Yeah, they belong in that conversation. And again, this speaks to my good fortune about being where I was. Mario Manningham is in that conversation. Again,
That Massillon game, I saw it in person with
I
a
did
full belly of Sunrise Inn, and he shocked Massillon when he.
Well, see,
Buena Vista that night, Drew?
here's what's interesting about that is that I think the folks in Massillon saw that as his unveiling.
Mm-hmm.
Not true. He played the week before against McKinley and scored, but the lore of his unveiling being against Massillon and scoring 4 touchdowns, I guess that that trumps the fact that we were bringing him along slowly as a sophomore, and he was certainly worthy, but that was another instance where we had to manage that the right way because we had a pretty good team.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a jump from freshman football to varsity football, often interrupted by what we call JV football.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were grooming him and bringing him along, and what he did on that particular night in Mollenkopf was legendary. Legendary over there too. I mean, if you mention the name Mario Manningham, their heads drop. And I mean justifiably so.
Yeah.
But no, you just named 3 guys that absolutely belong in that conversation.
And you talk about that, Mario. So I was in middle school, and my dad takes me up to the game where Mollenkopf, and actually I might have been a freshman in high school or whatever. The first 2 touchdowns were electrifying, and the buzz in that stadium when he went back to wait for a punt was unbelievable.
People were standing as if it was a 3-2 pitch in the World.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
Yeah.
I almost wish we had more moments like that.
Yeah.
We don't. We may in the future. I don't know. We are here at Jerzees Cafe downtown at the Centennial Plaza. Sam Bourquin, Sarachman, head coach Thom McDaniels. Special edition today of the High School Football Rewind here on Stark Media. We also want to thank our good sponsors at Waldenberg Chocolates and Nuts, McNeil Sons and Tree Service, C.H. Vallis and Associates, and finally here, Ohio.com, and of course St. Joe's Senior Living. We got lots of activities coming up. We'll get into those as we move forward. I want to get into scheduling, if we could.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, I grew up in the McKinley shadow, I guess, from where I lived geographically, and I remember very small pieces of the All-American Conference, just a little bit. Parents wouldn't let me go on the road games, only Fawcett, and then Independent comes into play, and then the Federal League. Take us through what it's like. What was it like as an independent and being the powerhouse that you were, as opposed to now you only need to get, I think, 3 or 4 non-conference games, but there's a science to that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And as an independent, you had to nurture relationships with, like Bill McGee at Akron Garfield, who was willing to play every year, willing to come to Fawcett every year, and willing to open the season. And he had his share of great football players, and
Charles Gladman, just to name one.
Well, his who's the DB from Ohio State? His son's in the league now. He was among the best opposing players I ever coached against. You know who I mean.
I know.
It's your job to
eating
think
me
of
up.
it. Okay, you got to think of it. Well,
Ward? Was it no?
Son played at Minnesota.
Yes.
He's now in the league and a very good player for the Buccaneers.
Whitfield.
Yes.
Antoine Whitfield.
Yes,
Thank you,
Antoine
Drew.
Whitfield. The other thing that we experienced as an independent, we knew we had Massillon week 10, and we knew we had Akron Garfield week 1, and then we had to find folks for the, Glen Oak as a Federal League team, starting with Bob Cummings, was willing to play. And not all Federal League teams were willing to play.
That was a rare occurrence back then.
So we were playing a lot of parochials.
Yep.
St. Joe.
You went home and home with Moeller.
We went home and home with Moeller.
Yep.
We went home and home with Elder. We went home and home with St. X. I remember we played him at St. X. One year I think Benjamin was a a freshman, and we lost 31-6, and we played them the next year at Fawcett, and we won 31-6. You know, but and that whole experience, you know, helping Bill Earl build a schedule, that was good for me to be a part of that. But it also gave me a comfort level about playing the parochials, because in many instances they were willing to play, and you know, and we still have that problem. You know, if you're very good in expanding the playoffs, we thought would encourage more people to be more willing. No,
It's not.
Went the other way.
It worked the other way. No, you know, I don't have to play those guys in
So I
order to
won't.
get in,
Right.
so they won't. But we worked hard at that, and you know, Mentor was willing to go home and home.
Remember one year, did you not? You went over to Pittsburgh Central Catholic one year. I know it was
Yes.
a 7-0
Yes.
defensive struggle, but you were
Yes.
willing to make the
Yes.
trip if you could, if you had to.
We went to Berwick, Pennsylvania. We played
Yep.
Erie Prep. You know, we had to go Detroit, De La
Brother
Salle.
Rice, didn't they come down once?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and you know, and those teams needed to be scouted too.
Yeah.
And everybody, you recall, and you may have been young, but we had a bunch of Saturday games.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was great.
And so
It was great.
We'd practice 5 days, have the shorter practice on Friday, and then we'd head out in 2 different directions to scout the next 2 opponents. And a bunch of people from the rest of the county, they'd followed their team on Friday, and they'd show up
Come
at
over to
Fawcett on
Fawcett
Saturday.
Saturday.
You remember
It
that,
was-
and I don't know if you do. You might have been too young then.
It was, and they were all events.
Yeah.
They weren't just football games. If people now that are just coming into the high school scene have no idea what we're talking about. But go to YouTube and go back, and if you got to get on the old microfiche at the library, because Saturday nights at Fawcett at 7:30 were an event.
Yeah.
People were there before the gates opened. They would mill around the concession area. They would watch the band come down the hill and come on the field. They'd put the red carpet. I mean,
The band would still be at the top of the hill and on the field at
yes,
the same time.
it was phenomenal. And I guess I'm saying, could we please ever get back to that? And I know we're not going to, but Coach, it was special.
There were rows high on the north stands, and it was nothing but coaches. There was a coaching convention taking place.
Right.
You know, whether they played us or not. You know, Donnie Hurtler mentioned to me that he'd play Friday and they'd come to our game on Saturday.
Yep.
But you know, some of them we played and they were scouting, and others we didn't play, but they were there
wanted to be
because
there.
it was going to be a good football game.
Yep.
I would
yeah.
do that when I was coaching, because you know what, it gives you ideas. You get this tunnel vision of, like, you know, this is what we want to do, and you may go watch another team that has similar personnel to you or runs a similar time and give you ideas of plays and stuff. So I'm sure a lot of coaches did that too, especially with how successful you guys were. Let's go see what McKinley's doing, see what we can use out of their playbook.
Well, you know, we ended up playing a bunch of the folks from the old Steel Valley.
Yeah.
You know, Boardman would play, and Fitch would play, and Mooney would play.
Mooney.
And
Those
so
were great games.
they were regular opponents, and we were willing to go away. But McKinley's got 4 home games this year.
Should never happen.
We'd have 6 or 7 often.
Yeah.
Remember that, you know, and
Massillon had what, 8 this year,
Yeah.
and one in a bye.
Yeah.
well,
Couldn't find a. Well, that, yeah.
in the guarantee that we offered the opponent didn't match what they could offer. You know, because we had 2 high schools and 4 middle schools and a bigger athletic department to finance and manage. But you know, the football and the basketball programs, they financed the athletic department
Oh, sure.
back then. It doesn't happen anymore because it can't. But no, I remember those days fondly.
Yeah. I had just incredible theater, incredible athletes, coaches, the crowds. I mean, it was a different day, and but we'll always have those to hold on to,
Sure.
which is the great thing.
Sure.
I've always wanted to kind of ask you, Coach, the year that you won the state title, and it was the following year you went into director of physical activities. What was that like? I see the look.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was terrible. It was very beneficial, and it was terrible not at the same time. The 97 season, I was finishing, I think my 26th or 27th year is an English teacher, football coach making $40,000. And Dan Brooks, who was the director of physical activities, he's due to retire at the end of February. And so I was approached about succeeding him in that capacity, but they wouldn't let me coach.
Wouldn't let you coach.
And I don't know that you could have done that job as well as it needed to be done and do the head football coaching job as well as it need. I don't know that you could do that at the same time, and they certainly weren't going to let me be the experiment. But I'm 3 years away from my retirement. My retirement's based on the average of my best 3 years, and so I'm going to double my salary overnight. There's a reason that I taught English and not math. The math overwhelmed me.
Yep.
And I thought, well, I need to do this, because at some point I'm going to retire, and
Family first.
and this is going to impact, the rest of my life and my wife's life for as long as we live, and so I accepted that offer. It meant, however, that I didn't coach Ben his senior year, or those other kids that were in the program and had just won a state championship, and I didn't have the pleasure of coaching and competing for a back-to-back state championship. I don't have a lot of regrets. I've been the luckiest guy I know, and feel very blessed. But I regret that because I didn't have that senior season with my son.
Yeah.
Now, and I remember when I made the decision and it became public, I told the coaches, you need Ben more than you need me. I said that, and I believed that, and I think to some extent that bore to be truthful. Because Kerry Hodakovic came in as a first-year coach, and they did it again.
Yeah.
Without the whole star quality that the 97 team had. And I think they may be maybe the only Division I public school to do that, to win back-to-back.
I think they were.
Okay.
I think they were.
So I regret not having that experience with him. I was close and I was around the program, but I had to keep my distance too. On the other hand, in 6 months into that job, I'm looking to get out of it. And I'm interviewing because I'm more comfortable dealing with kids than I am, 250 McKinley basketball season ticket holders who want to sit at mid-court for the tournament games.
And they need a hook for their coats.
Yeah,
and all these things come into
I
play.
functioned better in that other role than I did in that. And I interviewed multiple places. I interviewed at Cincinnati Princeton. I interviewed at John Carroll. I interviewed at Glen Oak. And nothing panned out for 2 years. So I functioned that role for 2 years. And then Gary Barber resigned at Warren Harding. And I called them and said, hey, I want to get into coaching. I miss it, and I want to talk to you. And so we had that conversation. They hired me. I took a pretty big hit financially, but I had 2 years at that rate, so that's gonna up the ante for the best 3 years of my coaching life. So I'm not overwrought with guilt and regret about that, but yeah, I wish that I'd spent Ben's senior season with him as his head coach rather than as the AD.
Yeah, I remember going down to, because we always did pregame interviews back then when I worked at this station right up the road here, and one of the most special men of my life, Jim Johnson, Jimmy was a stickler for getting there early, and the coaches wanted to be done early, and I know Coach loved doing pregame interviews, so you get there early, you get your questions in, and you get the hell out, and you get up to the booth and let these guys do what they want to do. So for 7:30 games, it was pretty much what, Coach, a 5:15 or 5:30 rule. We had to be there to talk, or it wasn't going to happen. And I remember going down when Coach Carey came in, and I got confused coming down the steps. I'm like, I was headed to talk to Coach McDaniels. I thought, I don't know. Coach Carey's over here. That's who I have to. It was because you were on the field that night, obviously before the game, and it was weird and bizarre at the same time. But he did pick up and had another great season and a state championship. But
right,
I guess, well, Drew, same thing for you. I mean, coaching never leaves you. I mean, you're a coach until that day comes, and you just, especially if you knew you had a lot left in the tank, that probably was difficult.
Well, I think to the extent that the players and I allow, when you're a kid's head coach, you're his head coach for the rest of I'm a kid's head coach for the rest of my life.
And not just for football.
Yeah, and I might not be his head coach for the rest of his life, but I'm available. You made reference to this several minutes ago about, seeing those kids that were kids that played for you, and they grew up and they graduated, and some went away to school, and some went in the military, and some got into the workforce, and they eventually got married, and they had children, and one of the great joys that I get from social media is these former players, now dads, celebrating their kids' birthdays, or their anniversaries. I mean, that's a really cool thing to experience.
Yep.
Yeah, you talk about it, Sam. Coaching never leaves you. I love having conversations about football. Me and Coach were sitting here before we started talking about differences between college and the NFL, and I Corey Lindsley, who's in the NFL now, is my first NFL guy. He's been in the league for a while now, but it's awesome to be able to talk to those guys about football and talk about their life and stuff like that, and see the behind the scenes. I've got a ton of kids in college now that I love looking, for how they're doing in the box scores and watching their games on TV. So you're right. And, I only did it for 15 years. You've got way more kids that you've got to keep up with than I do. But that's one of the special things about it. And, I think what speaks volumes about you as a coach is all those guys that I see on social media that still interact, with you. They're reaching out to you. Antonio Hall, still, you guys share a commonality in the position you held, but, to him, you're still his coach too. And that doesn't go away. And me, I played for Tim Terrell in high school, and I coached with him at Hoban. When things are not going right in my life sometimes, that's who I call. I call up Tim Terrell, and I know that means a lot to your players. So I think that speaks testaments of the type of coach and person you were, that all those guys still reach out to you. And,
that's there's not a monetary value that you can place on that as a person. They just know that I'm rich because of it.
For sure.
As we kind of wrap up, if you would go on a recruiting visit and you weren't trying to get a young man to come to play for you at a certain school, you were there to pitch the McKinley Massillon rivalry, and they knew nothing about it, what would you tell them?
I would try to articulate what it meant, and I was an English teacher, and so I should have been able to do that. But I don't think you can. I think that's something that you have to come and experience. And even then, if you're just a spectator, you get a taste, but I wish everybody that ever coached should be part of a game like that, of a rivalry like that. I always had high regard and respect for them, and I always understood that we couldn't be part of arguably the best high school football rivalry in the country without each other. And I don't know that everybody that follows both teams values that and appreciates that as much as we should. I remember this was probably in the 90s, and I remember having a conversation with a McKinley supporter, and he talked about how much he hated Massillon, and he was upset with me because I didn't. And I didn't mean to be glib, but I wanted to cut him off. And I said, why should I hate him? We beat him a lot. And again, that's not me taking a shot at Massillon. That's me trying to shut up a guy who didn't have an appreciation for the fact that, we can't have this without them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't have it without us. I think that's important. And I think the participants in the game have to be conscious of that and have to promote that.
Yep.
In order for it to survive and grow.
Yeah, you got to have the mutual respect. You have to.
Yes.
What's the old fear no one, but respect everybody?
Yep.
You got to have that. And you're right. Massillon got to have McKinley. McKinley has to have Massillon. The towns need each other. You just do, or you don't have what you have. And when you're talking about doing this now for the 133rd time, those values and those things, and some people would say, well, that's cornball talk and whatever. If you don't have that, you don't have this. We've seen a lot of, I don't want to say rivalries at this magnitude, but we've seen some series and some games go by the wayside because that was lost somewhere along the way.
Well, there's a significant embarrassment that I have, and it's mine alone, and it has to do with the McKinley-Massillon game. Lee Owens became the head coach, and in 1988, we'd won 4 years in a row, and he became the head coach in 1988, and he refused to exchange film. And back then I still think it was 16 millimeter. Maybe we were caught in the transition from 16 millimeter to, heck, there used to be beta tape, and then it went VA. So
Right.
So forgive me if I have the wrong format, but he was unwilling to exchange tape, and I took that badly, and I made the mistake of being public about it, and that was stupid, and that was immature, and that was childish, and I should not have done it, and it became a little bit of an issue. That McKinley-Massillon people and Lee and I we resolved that, but that kind of thing, and I'm not talking about his refusal to exchange tape. I'm talking about my reaction to it. And one of the things that I believe in and that I preach, and when somebody asks me to speak sometimes, this is one, you have to manage things well that can't be changed. And there are how many issues in our life that we're going to encounter like that.
Absolutely.
That's what football teaches you to do. I did not manage that well. And it was a major embarrassment for me, but being able to talk about it to now,
Sure.
I mean that helps make that a little bit better. But we need to be above that and past that. And I'm not condemning Lee at all. And I also know that he regrets to whatever extent that he did that. But if we can exchange with the 9 other opponents, that was my thinking, and I handle it badly, and I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
And those things happen when you're wrapped up in
That's the bubble,
the
man.
emotion of the week.
Right.
I remember St. V. Hoban. There were some things that happened, in the time that I was there that I regret, whether it's interactions with their coaches or stuff like that. But that stuff happens in the emotion of the week, and those are things that we learn from. So I think all of us coaches have those stories that say, I wish I would have handled that situation better.
Oh, yeah. And I've got more than one of those. I wish I had handled that differently. But I think that speaks to the fact that I thought we should have, this mutual respect. And again, I took it to an extreme and acted badly. And
Well, what do they say? Football teaches us all about the game
Yes.
of life, and there was
Yes.
another lesson, I guess.
And it teaches us
everybody
more
right there.
about ourselves. I think
Yeah,
that's
it
the
does.
big thing.
Yeah,
So,
it does.
yeah.
Yeah, and I also learned to manage things well that can't be changed. And that I tend to live by that now. Because we're going to encounter a bunch of those situations. Whether it's a bad call by a referee or a rainy, windy night when you don't want it to be rainy and windy, or something far more serious in life. We're going to encounter those things. We have to manage them well.
Couldn't have ended on a better note. Do want to remind everybody that coming up here Thursday night, Central Catholic St. Thomas. Join us on Stark Media YouTube channel for the live broadcast, video and audio from Central Catholic. That's Thursday night at 6:45. On 106.9, you can catch Lake and Green. If Lake wins, they'll get a share of the Federal League Championship. On the YouTube channel, it'll be Tuslaw and Fairless. On 99.7, it will be Jackson and North Canton Hoover, one of the great rivalries in the area as well. Also, Drew, let's get everybody up to speed on Saturday right here at the Centennial Plaza, and we'll get our sponsors' names out there and some of the activities. And I guess the hoopla begins at 10 a.m. Saturday.
Yeah, 10 a.m. Jim Ballard, Mark Milano, and myself will be here live from Centennial Plaza. You'll be able to see us on the big screen. You can also catch us if you don't want to come down, or if you're preparing to go over to the game, you can catch us on YouTube live on this YouTube channel starting at 10 a.m. At 10:45, we have Jeff Lindesmith, the head coach of Canton Central Catholic. At noon, we have A.J. Sarbaugh, the head coach of Fairless, and we still have some other coaches we're waiting to confirm with. But we're going to recap the night before, Rivalry weekend in high school football. We're going to get you all prepped, ready for that big Massillon McKinley showdown. We're going to give you some of our keys to the game. So get down to Centennial Plaza. If you have not been here for a game, it is unbelievable. Week 1, I was able to watch the Browns game here.
Oh, yeah.
There were about 600 people watching the Browns game out here with chairs on the big screen. And when Cade York hit that field goal, it was like we were at the game. It's a massive screen, high-definition screen.
Great sound quality.
Great sound. You know, hats off to Pat Wyatt, who runs Centennial Plaza down here. He's does a great job. He's going to have us all set up there. So come down and visit us. Parcher Realty team at Howard Hanna, which is located right down here, right across the street. They're one of our sponsors. We appreciate them, supporting this. Chris Majori and Jerzees Cafe. Jerzees is going to be open. You need something to eat. You need some beverages to enjoy.
Right here.
You can get them right here. And we hope to see everybody 10 a.m. Saturday.
That's right. And also want to thank our good friends at Waldenberg Chocolates and Nuts, McNeil & Sons Tree Service, C.H. Vallis and Associates, and, of course, finally here, Ohio.com and St. Joe's Senior Living. Want to thank Coach Thom McDaniels for coming over today. I could do this for another 5 hours. I know Coach has places to go. Maybe we can revisit again here down the road. And thanks so much for what you've done for us, who you have been, and don't have enough thank yous, but we appreciate
thank you so much
over.
for letting me be part of this week and this weekend again. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
All right. Check us out, Stark Media YouTube channel. Lots of great things coming up. Keep it right here.